Welcome to episode 93 of the Comic Watchers Show. I am back after an unfortunate absence from our last episode. Wasn't feeling super hot, kind of hit a wall, burning the candle at both ends, blah, blah, blah. It's not Rona. I'm okay. I'm safe. Everyone in my house is healthy. Just working phenomenally hard. With me as ever are Mike and Nick. Gentlemen, hey, hey, hey.
Hey, hello.
And with us this week, our very special guest, Image co-founder and Shadowhawk creator himself, Mr. Jim Valentino. Hey,
hello.
Jim.
Hey, guys.
Hello,
Thank you so much for dropping by. I'll ask you the same thing. I always like to make sure with all our guests, well, all, are you safe? Are you healthy? Is everyone in your family or household healthy right now?
Everything's good. I'm safe. I've been quarantined for the last 5 months, I guess now. God. But yeah, everyone's safe. Everyone's okay. And gratefully, it's all good.
That's excellent. Well, I think we're going to probably cover a wide range of topics, just kind of freewheeling and all that. But you're an industry legend, co-founder of Image. You've kind of just been this. I don't want to say quiet figure necessarily, but you've just always been there. And you've always been in the scenery, and I think you've got your finger on the pulse of the industry. What, just given all your insider knowledge and knowledge of history of where we've been and where we're possibly going, what are your thoughts on where we are in the comic industry right now in the year of our Lord 2020?
We're in a real transitional phase, and this happens every few years. I don't want to say every 10 years or every 5 years or whatever it is. It varies a bit. But we're in a transitional phase. What happens, the comics industry is very much up and down and up and down. And it's very cyclic. And we're going through a very odd cycle, mostly because of the pandemic. So this one's a bit harder to read and to know where it's going to wind up. I think everything will even out probably by the 1st of next year, probably by the 1st of 2021. And things will even out. We may lose some people, and I don't mean them dying necessarily. I mean, some publishers or some creators that, won't make it till next year. But I think by and large, everybody's pretty solid, and, it's, like I said, it's very transitory right now. We've never been in a situation like this. But then again, no one has, so.
Yeah, in my head, even though it's only July, I was kind of already writing my year-end, 2020, a year like none other in comics article in my mind. And I suspect a lot of people might be already. But yeah, I completely agree with you. This has really been a time like nothing I've ever seen. I mean, you lived through the bubble bursting in the 90s. I was just a kid at that time wondering.
Oh, me too. I was 7. It was terrible.
Wow, you were quite the entrepreneur at 7.
Yeah, well, I had a whole beard and everything. It was great.
That's understandable. Got you. Nick, go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of speaking to that entrepreneurial state, I mean, the transitory state of the industry that we find ourselves in now, we've noticed it's forced a lot of readers to look into maybe indie publishers or titles like that aren't necessarily mainstream books. And I'm super excited about it. Is there any kind of advice that you would give, given your experience in the industry, to people breaking in right now?
Well, it may be a difficult time to break in, but you have more opportunities to break in than ever before with crowdsourcing. You would be able to self-publish on your own. There's the web, which certainly didn't exist when I was breaking in. So you have opportunities. I mean, and it depends on what you want to do. If your creative goal in life is to do Spider-Man or Wonder Woman, well, there's only one place you can do that, and you should follow that. If that's your goal, if that's your dream, go ahead. There's nothing wrong with that. It's perfectly valid. If your goal is to create something personal or something that's a bit offbeat or that kind of thing, then there are publishers that are looking for that kind of material. So, I'll tell you one thing, and this is something that I say to a lot of people. Everybody always wants to copy the last big thing, okay? And it never works because the next big thing is always completely different from the last big thing. When Kirkman first brought me The Walking Dead, I told him zombie comics don't sell, and they didn't.
Yeah.
His did. So, help that it was damn good.
Yeah, well, that was part of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Mike, go ahead.
Yeah, Jim, speaking about breaking in to comics, take us back to what broke you into comics. Was it just you going to the grocery store, getting out the spinner rack? What was that first major experience that broke you into comics?
well, breaking in and then my first experience with comics were pretty wide apart.
Sure.
I started drawing when I was about 2, and I would draw everything that I saw. I'd sit in front of the TV and draw what I saw on television. And my father was in World War II, and he read comics in World War II. His favorites were Captain America, who he loved. That was his favorite character. He loved the Justice Society, and he loved the Submariner. And the reason he called him the Submariner. And he said the reason that he loved the Submariner was Captain America hated Nazis, but the Submariner hated everyone, so he liked him better. So, that was my dad. So what he did was he brought me comics, and for me it was like a religious experience. It's what people say that they feel when they get religion. That was comics for me. So I never wanted to be anything else. It's just when I was coming up, there was no guidebooks of how to do it. I'd never seen a page of original art. I had no idea how you broke in. I didn't know how it was done, and I was too stupid to figure it out. So my roommate at the time, Randy Challenor, and I had heard about San Diego Comic-Con. And we just missed it, I think, by a couple of weeks. So we were determined that we were going to go, that no matter what, we were going to go. And I think the first one we went to was 1974. Not sure. It could have been 75. But it was a religious experience. I moved to San Diego the next week. I literally packed everything I had in a backpack, stuck my thumb out. I was living in Mill Valley, which is just north of San Francisco, and moved to San Diego because I realized that if I joined the San Diego Comic-Con committee, I could get involved with people who were in the industry or breaking into the industry. It would be a way for me to learn, what it was about and how to do it. Now, I can't say that that's a vehicle for anyone nowadays, but it was way back in the Stone Age. So, that was pretty much it. What happened when I wound up going to town was there was a lot of people that were just on the cusp of breaking in or had just broken in that were around my age. So people like John Pound and Scott Shaw and Dave Stevens and several other, Craig Anderson, who became an editor at Marvel, became my editor at Marvel on Guardians of the Galaxy. So there was a group of people around the same age in San Diego at that time. So it was the right move.
Well, that's pretty awesome, actually. I mean, that's a very different origin story, I think, than a lot of what we hear.
Actually, I came from another planet, and yeah.
There we go. Last son of a dying world.
Yes.
But so I'm, fast forward a few years, and you're penciling, if I remember correctly, and please, if I'm wrong, correct me. Guardians of the Galaxy opportunity comes along to write, and the thing took off. It's interesting to me because nobody was really talking about Guardians at that point. The property had been pretty moribund for about 7 or 8 years.
Well, you missed a whole bunch before then, but I actually started out in what we call, I think, small press comics today.
Okay.
So they were the homemade kind of things. I always wrote and drew my own stuff. I did a series called Normal Man for Aardvark Vanaheim, and Normal Man was a parody. I did a couple of other things here and there, and eventually went to Marvel. When I went to Marvel, actually the first thing I did was I drew a King Cole story, and I wrote a Red Sonja story, which is stranger. Somebody else drew, I don't remember who. And then I started doing a lot of what ifs. So I was looking for a steady gig, because that's what you do. I had several pitches. Tom DeFalco and Mark Grunwald were going to be at a convention in Oakland. So my oft-time studio mate, Rob Liefeld, and I were going up. Okay. I think Rob had just gotten the gig on New Mutants. I'm not real sure. Or he could have still been working on Hawk and Dove. So I had a bunch of pitches, including one that Rob and I wanted to do together that we called Young Avengers, which was basically a Teen Titans for Marvel.
Mm-hmm.
So when we pitched it at Tom said that he had just finished writing a script with basically Marvel's Teen Titans, and he called them the New Warriors. We had no idea this was going on. So one of the pitches that at the very, very end of the thing, just before we left, I called up Rob. I'm looking through the Marvel handbook, the Universe handbook, whatever it was called. And I hit on the Guardians of the Galaxy, and I call up Rob and I go, "What do you think of the Guardians of the Galaxy?" And he goes, "It looks cool, but they don't have a story." 2 days later, I think I woke up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom, and it hit me. Why not do an exploration of the Marvel Universe 1,000 years in the future? And the way to tie the whole thing together was have Vance Astro, who had already been established as a huge fan of Captain America, why not do a quest for his shield? And I called up Rob the next morning and told him my idea, and he was like, "That's great, do that." It turned out that Tom DeFalco, again, he was thinking about a Guardians of the Galaxy series set 500 years after the then current group. But he liked my idea better than his. So I told him, if you approve this, I'll set that idea up for you, which I did in the 8th issue. So, that's how it happened. And there's a key for people who want to break into the business. If you want to break in at Marvel, for example, don't go after the X-Men. You're not going to get the X-Men. Look for somebody that nobody else is touching. Look for a character that's moribund. Look for a character that doesn't really have a story, and come up with something original for that character. It's much easier to get in that way than it is to try to get in doing the X-Men.
I think there was one artist, and God, if I can remember his name, I'm not going to remember his name, but somebody or other was doing their own X-Men comic completely illegally and publishing it online. And Marvel slapped him with the cease and desist, but they were so
arrogant.
I'm sorry?
Arrogant?
Totally. But then they hired him. and I cannot remember who this was. This is probably about 6-7 years ago. But anyway, campfire tales at this point.
Yeah.
So, you know, and Guardians of the Galaxy, from what I understand, really took off. Kind of a sleeper hit for the time. And it's interesting to me because this is a book that's very rooted in old school Marvel, I guess, for lack of a better term. And yet at the same time, you're seeing this transition of what would become the Image guys really redefining what was popular, what was hot at the time, what was the new standard. Did you feel like working around these guys? You shared a studio with Liefeld and all these other hot shots like Lee or Protasio. Did you ever feel like, hey, I could maybe hang with these guys stylistically, and I don't know, or what was it? Did one inform the other? I don't know. There's a question in there somewhere. I kind of lost my train of thought. Sorry about that.
The funny thing is that almost all of them inked a cover of the Guardians for me. Jim did, Rob did, Todd did, Eric did. So that was kind of nice, that because we had different inkers on every cover of the Guardians. So that was great. We all knew one another, okay, and that was part of it. And wanting to imitate them, not me personally, but I think we were all individual, despite the fact that people used to say there was an Image style. Usually what they meant by Image style was Rob Liefeld. And I don't know why they just didn't say there was a Rob style. There was a Jim style, and those styles were very popular and good on them. But I didn't draw anything like them, and neither did Todd. And, Eric, I think is more along the lines of a frenetic Jack Kirby, but so what happened was Rob burst into our house. Rob would come over often. He came into our house once and said, wouldn't it be cool to do a comic from start to finish, do everything? And Diane, my wife at the time, and I burst out laughing because we'd been doing that for years. So I said, do you want us to teach you how to do it? So we taught him about page marriages and how it works and pagination and all that kind of stuff. We just sat down and laid it out for him to show him how it was done. He decided that he wanted to do something on his own. Now, you have to remember, Rob had done Youngblood as an independent comic with a small publisher. So he had already had a taste of that. And so he had done an ad in the Comics Buyer's Guide for a new group called the Executioners. Okay. Got an early morning phone call from Bob Harris yelling at him that he could not trade off of the X franchise and that he'd never work in this town again and all that kind of stuff. It was supposed to scare Rob, but it didn't. It just pissed him off.
That sounds right.
So he started talking to the three people in the industry that he knew the best and that he trusted the most. So that was me as an off again, on again studio mate, Eric Larson, and Todd McFarlane. Todd at the time was retired. Okay. He had retired when Cyan was born, his first daughter. Okay. So he had quit Spider-Man, and what he wanted to do was he wanted to do hockey cards, trading cards with hockey guys, because he's Canadian and that's the law. You have to like hockey. So he was talking to us pretty much all summer, trying to convince us to do this. Finally, in December of '91, Sotheby's is having its first comic book auction. And they're auctioning off the original art for X-Force #1, Spider-Man #1, and Jim's X-Men #1. Okay. So Todd and Rob are going to New York together on a plane. So I get a phone call from Todd going, asking if I was in. He says, I got Eric Larson in one pocket. I want to know if I got Jimmy V in the other pocket. And I go, are you in? And he goes, yeah. And I go, for sure, Todd, you're not going to leave us hanging on this, right? You're in. He goes, I'm in. And I went, okay, then I'm in too. Then I had to go home and explain it to my wife. was probably scarier than saying I'm in. So I had been talking to two friends of mine about this during the summer, one of them being Larry Motter, who later became the executive director of Image, and the other one being Eric Stevenson, who you may have heard of. So I get a call from Rob when they're in New York. And he says that they ran into Mark Silvestri in the hallway of this hotel and told him what they were planning, and Mark signed on, said, I'm in. Okay. It's like, wow, holy shit. Then the next day I get a call and he goes, we just signed on Jim Lee. And I went, oh my God. Yeah. So I called up Larry and I said, remember that avalanche we were talking about all summer? He goes, yeah. And I said, I think it just became an atomic bomb. And he goes, why? And I said, they just signed on Jim Lee. And there was just dead silence on the phone. And he goes, you guys are going to do so much damage. And I started laughing. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
That's the real origin of Image Comics.
That's an awesome story, though. Like everyone's kind of aware at this point, the rancor of corporate BS versus you guys wanting your artistic freedom, character ownership, and so on. But I love those inside baseball type things.
I don't think it was about that necessarily. I mean, everybody's got all wrong in the sense that why not form your own company? Why not give yourself a better job? Okay, why not? By us going out on our own, I mean, we decided a couple of things that I think were very, very smart at the time. One of them was that each of us would be independent of the other. We would have complete autonomy one from the next. So I would never make a dime off of Spawn, right? Mm-hmm. Jim Lee would never make a dime off of Youngblood, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We were completely separate from one another, separate companies. That was decided from day one. We would not interfere with one another. In other words, if somebody wanted to start a toy company, okay, that's weird, but okay. Somebody wanted to sell their company to DC, sure, why not? Who cares?
Yeah.
So that was there. And then the reason that we were all together in on this, the umbrella was Image. And it gave us more buying power for distributors, for paper, for just everything, literally. It gave us the umbrella company, which is Image Comics, gave us that. It gave us buying power. So the thing was we also decided we would let other people publish under the banner, and they would own and control their own property.
So I know early on you had a partnership with Malibu that lasted maybe a year-ish?
No,
not even that?
Well, it lasted a year, but it wasn't a partnership.
Oh, okay. And Malibu shortly thereafter was purchased by Marvel.
I remember the most of us at the time were working for, all of us were working for Marvel except for Todd, okay? So we were all either writers or pencilers, or in some cases, pencilers and inkers, whatever. We were all freelancers for Marvel. So in starting your own company, there's all kinds of infrastructure that we didn't have. None of us had this kind of infrastructure to actually run a company. How do you make a deal with a distributor? We didn't know. How do you do all these things that a company would entail, that business entails? So what we did was we hired Malibu at 10% of I think it was net earnings. Okay, not gross, but net. Dave Olbrich can correct me on that. Okay, it was a lot of money for them, but the contract lasted for 1 year. And after that 1 year, we had incorporated Image, set the bylaws of the company, the stock shares and all that kind of stuff, you know, all the actual business stuff, which we had a whole entire year to pull together and learn how to do.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, I mean, that's just incredible, really. That the business side of Image, I think it feels like to me just kind of rejuvenized the industry, almost revolutionized, because I come in at a much later stage. I was introduced to comics through the digital comics, and you know, my wife doesn't read Marvel or DC, but she knows Image
I
comics.
never did either.
I love it, and that's something I feel like Image has an important place in comics for, especially as a fan like I am. But the business side of it, and I hear the freedom for creatives and wanting to be in control of, you know, your own work and giving yourself a better job. But did you understand at the time that you did have your finger on the pulse of the industry and fandom in such a way that it would eventually lead to something like the Walking Dead phenomenon?
Well, yes and no. We were very constant at the fact that we had the three biggest creators in the field leading the company. So once you start a company with people as popular as Todd and Rob and Jim, you're pretty sure things are going to be okay. You know? There was a lot of buzz, and we kind of figured it would work. I mean, what Diane said to me, you know, what I said to her was I either made the biggest mistake of my life or else, you know, I did real good. She said, like, what did you do now? You know, like, you know, your wife will, you know, do, you know, because they all know that we're idiots. So I told her, and she just said, no, I think it was a good move. And that was pretty much all of our. And then once the thing took off, I mean, Youngblood was the first book out of the gate.
Yeah.
And it sold, I think, initially 750,000 copies. And you have to remember that even though X-Force #1 sold 5 million copies, Rob is the creator, owner, co-writer, penciler, made more money off of that than he ever made off of any book at Marvel, because we own the whole damn thing. He owned the whole thing. There's the thing about Rob, and Rob gets a lot of shit, and I think he gets a lot of it unfairly. But the Kirbys were the first people outside of our little group whom I told about Image and what Image was. And they were very supportive of us. And Rob did a book called Phantom Force that all of the money went to the Kirbys. So he gave them a check for over $1 million.
Wow.
Okay. That never happened before. I don't think it ever happened since or after that. But there you go. That's what it was like.
Wow.
So yeah, we kind of thought it would be okay. But like I said, this industry is cyclic. You never know. You can't predict. I mean, I don't know what's going to happen, 2 years from now or, 50 years from now, other than the fact that I won't be here. But, I mean.
Mike, go ahead.
With Image taking off, and obviously the big two had to have some type of answer, do you feel that Marvel did the Clone Saga, obviously, with Ben Reilly taking over, the death of Superman, the breaking of, the Batman? Was that a happy convenience, or do you think that was like the big two trying to find an answer for this brand new company that is just taking the hobby by storm?
Look at the dates.
Hmm?
Look at the dates for those things, and that'll give you your answer. Okay? No matter what they say, because they all deny it, but
Sure,
look at the
sure.
dates. Just look at the dates. You know, what happened, one of the very first things was Larry Martyr was working for Gary Calabono at Moondogs. Moondogs was a multi-store in Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
And Gary had just taken the reins of the Chicago Comic-Con. This was before Wizard. And they brought to the table, to the committee, you know, let's make Image Comics our guests of honor for, I think it was 1992. And it, you know, they got poo-pooed and said, well, they won't be together by summer. You know, it'll be over. I don't know if you guys saw on my Facebook page, I posted the 10th anniversary
I saw that.
Yeah, that I had the guys make. And, you know, when I said was Eric could be on the left, kneeling, and then because Eric's 6'2", right? And then Mark could be standing because Mark's 6'7", and then Todd on his immediate right, because Todd's about 5'10", I think, 5'8", 5'10", somewhere in that vicinity, and then I would be the last one because I'm 5'4", just almost 5'5". So, anyways, if you put your fingers up in that configuration, you'll see what we were saying to our detractors, you know, which we had many at the time that said we wouldn't last for 6 months. So this was our 10th anniversary, and it was a big fuck you. And, you know, so anyway, so the board of directors in San Diego, or in Chicago, decided to make us the guests of honor. And immediately DC and Marvel pulled out of the convention, which was really stupid because they gave the convention to us, basically. So we walked into this convention with absolutely zero competition.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's awesome. That's awesome. That's a very telltale kind of like waving the flag type of deal. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, you know, eventually, by the end of the 90s, Image looks really different. Jim Lee's gone. Liefeld's situation is sort of in flux. And you kind of took the reins of everything. What was that transition like for you?
At the time, I was kind of laying low. I was in one of my lay low periods. There was a lot going on in my personal life.
Gotcha.
And I get a call from Todd, I think, saying that he wants Larry, who was the publisher at that time, basically. You know, Larry never wanted to be the publisher. He's a wartime consigliere. That's what he is. And basically what that means is his job as the executive director was to direct the executives. So he was the one who kept peace between the various partners when things would flare up. And a little bit before this time, I think it was 1995 or so, is when the Rob and Jim happened and the Mark thing happened. So Mark had left, and you know, just it was a mess. So by 1999, Larry had had enough. He didn't want to be the publisher, and he was going to go work with Todd. So Todd called me up and he said, "Larry's going to come work for me. Do you have a problem with that?" And I was like, "No, I don't care." And then he said, "I just don't know how to replace him. I don't know what we could do." And I said, "I can replace him." And Larry and I talked, and Larry said he just didn't know what to do with Image anymore. And at the time, Image was publishing all these titillation books, which I thought were really crappy, and I thought we could do better. He was and Mark was the one who said this in I think the first meeting we talked about me taking over, was that everybody and their brother had their logos on the cover of our books. And Mark said it looked to him like they were riding the old whore into town. And he wanted that to stop. And I agreed. I said, yeah. So what I did was I said, I'm going to do Scorched Earth. I'm going to get rid of all of these books. I don't care if they're making money or not. Getting rid of all of them, because the only way that we can rebuild the company is by getting rid of the shit that's on the floor. So I started talking to people like Brian Bendis and Warren Ellis and people like that to try to bring people in. Well, the first year or so was kind of rough. Within the second year, I think I brought in Eric Stevenson, whom I had worked with years before at Extreme, and who I actually brought into the industry and taught him how to edit, how to write a comic, all this kind of stuff. So I brought in Eric as my second. Funny thing is we looked at what we were publishing. It was difficult. It was hard because Image had fallen so far down that it was difficult to get people to see what we were doing, and it had to be built slowly, and carefully. We realized that we didn't have any superhero comics except for Savage Dragon. It was the only superhero comic that Image was publishing at the time, which everybody thought we were a superhero company, which we never were a superhero company. There's another story there, but I got a million of them. It was tough, but I had figured I wanted Image to stand for some quality, to be diverse. I remember Maggie Thompson came up to me at a San Diego Comic-Con and asked what my publishing philosophy was. Well, at the time, I had just published a oversized reprint of Leave It to Chance, which is a wonderful book by James Robinson and Paul Smith. And I had just published The Pro, which was by Garth Ennis and Jimmy Palmiotti and Amanda Connor. Okay, and The Pro is about a prostitute that gets superpowers. So here was this kid's book and this, horribly inappropriate superhero. And I said, this is my philosophy. This is what I'm trying to do. That I want to make the company so bloody diverse that all you can think of when you think of Image is these are quality books. We may not publish you may not like every book that we publish. That's fine. That's perfect. You shouldn't like every book that we publish, but there should be at least one book that we publish that you do like a great deal, and that was my goal.
Whoa.
Still is.
Oh,
No, go ahead.
well, I was gonna say, you mentioned Bendis, and I was thinking about this earlier today. It seems like 2000 when Powers #1 came out, that to me was kind of symbolically this big turning point for where Image had been versus where it was heading. I mean, it was this critical darling, trades out the ass, everyone was talking about it. Like, this guy writes the craziest dialogue you've ever read. It's so cool. And I don't know, just like to me, that was like a dividing line. And it sounds to me like that's a lot of what you're saying too. But finding some, and I know Bendis had published a couple other books through Image up to that point. I believe Torso and Jinx were both Image.
Yeah, they're through my Shadowline.
Right.
Yeah.
And I don't know, things really changed. And I think that is Image became how we think of Image today, as the prestige company where you take your.
But if you go back and you look, what you see is that I was publishing a bunch of very alternative black and white comics at the time, including a lot of Bendis's work and Michael Avon Oming and a bunch of people, William Messner Loebs, just a ton of people that I was publishing at the time. Black and white, very independent. Jim Lee, at the time through Homage, was publishing Astro City and things like that. America's Greatest Comics. So it's like, while we got the rap for being a superhero company, which I'll explain, we weren't really, not at any point, not really. I mean, we published things like Bone. We published Groove for a whole entire year. We, it's like we were open to being diverse. The reason we all started out doing superhero comics is this. We had all seen people who had left Marvel, left DC, and done their art book, quote unquote, okay, and fail miserably. We didn't want to fail. We wanted to go toe-to-toe with them. Well, how do you go toe-to-toe with someone? Well, the first thing you do is you do the stuff that your fans want to see. You do stuff that isn't inaccessible, but is more accessible. And so since we had all come from basically superhero backgrounds, right, it was kind of a no-brainer. Well, we'll do all these superhero books. Doesn't mean we're a superhero company. It just means this is how we stand toe-to-toe with Marvel. This is how we stand toe-to-toe with DC.
And hey, you gave us Shadowhawk out of it. Who?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Oh.
Well, I know that there was some controversy, as you will, about how violent it was or whatever, but I think it's really interesting that you made the conscious decision to make your lead character have HIV or be HIV positive. That was a very hot button issue in the 90s. What led you to
that? Some kind of justification for why he was so violent. Something that I could live with, because I had gotten mail from kids basically saying, make him more violent, have him kill people. And I was like, oh, God. So that was it, basically. That was my impetus. It didn't start out that way, but it just evolved to it.
Gotcha.
But Shadowhawk, like an awful lot of creators, and this is true, as you talk to creators, you'll find this to be true. Their most popular creation is not their favorite creation necessarily. It's their most popular, but not their favorite. And Shadowhawk is certainly that for me. It's not my favorite creation. It's not the favorite thing I worked on. It's probably my least favorite.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Interesting. So, what would be your favorite creation of your own?
Yeah. I did a book just before I became Image's publisher called A Touch of Silver. Touch of Silver was autobiographical, semi-autobiographical, and it was about a kid who was pretty disenfranchised, but he loved superhero comics. And initially, I had done it at the first. I'd done a ash can, and I used, I think, an old Superboy comic and something else, and I got a call from Paul Levitz saying you can't do that because of trademark issues and stuff. So, and it was very nice, he was very nice about it and all that kind of stuff. It wasn't threatening or anything like that. And I went, okay, I thought it was kind of fair use because I wasn't advertising the fact that these things were in there or anything. But I didn't want to, rustle anybody's feathers or anything. So I called up Alan Moore and Steve Bissett and Rick Veitch and said, can I use the 1963 characters instead of the Marvel characters? And they all went, sure. And then I called up my friends at Big Bang, Chris and oh God, I'm blanking on his name now. But I called them up and said, can I use the Big Bang characters in place of the DC characters? Sure. So that was that.
Huh.
But that's my favorite piece that I've ever done.
That's awesome. I'm going to have to look for that.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. It's really cool to kind of hear the creators side of it. When we've talked to a lot of creators on the show, and we always want to talk about, our favorite works from them and what they've done in the past. But really what I found is they're more interested in what's happening in the future, what they're working on and what's coming out. And I think, the Shadowline industry, you've got a lot of cool stuff. Sonata is one of the recent titles. Is there anything you're working on now that you're really excited about that's got you kind of hyped about?
Everything I work on, otherwise I wouldn't do it. And it's really just that simple. I mean, for me, it's just a matter of, I want to do books that are interesting and that are a bit different, that are not, I would never publish a Ersatz Superman, for example, unless somebody came up with something that was so unique, so different. It's not that I'm against publishing superheroes. When I was publisher of Image, I published a book called, oh God, now I'm blanking on it.
Noble Causes?
Noble Causes, thank you. And it was pitched to me as, what if the Kennedys had superpowers?
Whoa.
And I went, that's a cool idea, I published a book that was pitched to me as, it's like Homicide, except they investigate superhero murders. That's powers, So it was like if you can pitch me something that I've never heard before that sounds interesting, that I go, tell me that story. I want to know what that story is. That's my whole criteria. That's what I want to know.
That's really cool. Even just talking to you now, I really get the sense that you have an idea how to spot talent in the industry, and that's really worked well for.
Just every now and then I luck out, so it makes all the bad stuff look good.
Like, do you feel like that's something that you really bring to the table, or do you really feel like it's just kind of been luck and you're more on the creative side yourself?
I think it probably has just a lot to do with the fact that I'm very story oriented. And like I said, I wanted to tell me a good story. There are some people like Jimmy Robinson, for example, who's doing a new Bomb Queen series for us, starting next month or the month after. But I think he's one of the most underrated creators in the field. He's incredibly diverse. He's astoundingly good. And nobody seems to know him other than Bomb Queen, which, which I love, and is, I love it mostly because it's just completely 100% wrong. Our next book is our next series is called Trump Card, and we say it's guaranteed to offend everyone. So it's like, for me, that's that's great. So I mean, it's like, I got pitched a story that it never came out, but I think it's one of the best pitches I've ever heard. And the pitch was, it's 15th century feudal Japan and the Vikings land.
Ooh.
Yeah, see? And I go, tell me that story. I want to read that.
I would read that.
Yeah, I want to read that story. So, I mean, that's that's it. Now, who comes up with those good ideas? People that are really talented, people like O'Brien Michael Bendis, and, people like that, Jimmy Robinson, So that's all.
That's all.
Mike?
Yeah, Jim, throughout your career, be it writer, artist, publisher, what have been some of your favorite memories, some of your favorite like mantelpieces that you've done that you kind of look back on and go, like, yeah, like I created that, or that's because of me, or that's because of what we created, type deal.
I don't look at it that way. I just I just really don't. I mean, the things that I remember. I was thinking of this, the things that have meant something to me is being able to introduce disparate people to one another. that's been very cool, and I've had that opportunity a couple of times. Before San Diego moved to the big giant convention center that they've been at for the last God knows how many years, there was an interim convention center. I think this would have been about 85, 86, somewhere in that vicinity. And I'm walking through with Jerry Siegel, whom I was going to do a book with at the time. And coming up towards us was Nestor Redondo, who I had worked with in animation. And I got to introduce Nestor to Jerry, which was very cool because they both just freaked out at one another. So it was awesome to watch these two legends, you know, meet one another. At Eric Stevenson's first wedding, it was the last time I saw Jack and Roz Kirby. And Roz was talking to Diane, I think about grandkids or kids or something, and Jack was going on and on about World War II and the little guy, like he always did. And so I reached over to Jack and I extended my hand and I said, "Hi, Jack, I'm Jim Valentino." And Roz hit me on the shoulder. And she goes, "He knows who you are, Jim. You don't have to introduce yourself to him every single time." And I just looked at her and said, "It does not compute that he knows who I am. He's not supposed to know me." It's like, that's not okay. It's not the way of the world. So those are the kind of things that I think about when I look back on my career, you know. One of the photographers for San Diego Comic-Con had told me at the beginning of convention, he apologized to me and said, "I'm not going to take photographs of famous people." And I went, "Oh, okay." I don't care. And so I'm talking to Will Eisner at one point. He comes up and snaps our picture. And I go, "I thought you weren't going to take pictures of famous people." He goes, "Yeah, well, you know, too damn right, I had to."
Yeah.
So, what are your feelings on where Image is today? I mean,
I love it.
Yes.
Love it. There's wonderful books, very creative, very different. Eric is doing a wonderful, wonderful job. Couldn't be prouder of the job that he's done. It's not that I like every single book that Image publishes, because I don't, you know, but that's okay. That's fine. At least they're publishing stuff that's, you know, expanding what we can see, what we can publish. And I think that's good.
that is, and I would say, looking at the last 5, 6, 7 years, there's just been this giant boom, mushroom cloud even, of independent-minded,
like that.
independent companies that are, you know, not necessarily trying to compete with the big two, but just do their own thing.
Which is
and great. That's great. That's so healthy for the industry. And I mean, I think Image is the root of all that. I mean, yeah, there was a black and white boom in the 80s. It came, it went.
It goes a bit further than that. I mean, you know, there was Eclipse, and there was Star Reach, I think was probably the very first one. And there was Aardvark Vanaheim, Dave Sims' company. There was, I said Eclipse. What else was I thinking of?
Pacific.
Pacific, yes. Yeah. Pacific, yeah. So there was, you know, there are antecedents, you know, and there were certainly all the underground comics and stuff like that, Last Gasp and Rip Off Press, et cetera, et cetera. So we weren't, you know, by any means the first or the originators.
But I feel like Image kind of coalesced all of these movements that had been percolating for years to various degrees of success and just codified it. It's like, this is how you do it. This is what can be accomplished. And we're seeing the fruit of that now.
With the big three and you know what we brought in.
Yeah.
Also, you know, like you guys are you know, obviously of a different generation than I. Image. When I was a kid, I was born in 1952. Okay. So you asked about my early memories. The very first comic that I ever actually remember reading, I didn't buy it. It was actually a cousin of mine had it. The prick wouldn't give it to me. But it was about this guy who ran really fast in a red suit, and he was running from this guy who talked real slow. I really loved this comic. I was like, this is so cool. It wasn't until many, many years later when it was reprinted that I discovered that it was Showcase number 4. Okay. In 1962, as DC was starting its Silver Age and Marvel was just beginning, you know, in that I turned 10 at the end of 1962. So I'm 8, 9 years old right around this time when all this stuff is starting, is percolating. And with Marvel, especially, it was not my dad's comics. This was a whole, as far as I was concerned, a brand new company, brand new heroes, completely different looking and smelling and feeling than what DC was putting out. And I glommed onto it because, like, these are my comics. This is something I can get in on the ground floor. The first Marvel comic I remember buying, I think, was Fantastic Four number 5. And I remembered it because the Thing became Blackbeard, the pirate, which I thought was so cool. So that's cool. The first Spider-Man I ever bought was number 4. Okay, and I remember the 4 panels on the cover with the Sandman fighting him. So it's like I was there at the ground floor for all of this stuff. So when we started Image, it was the same thing for a whole completely new generation. They could start on the ground floor. You could buy Spawn from issue number 1 straight on through. You didn't have to buy 75 years of continuity. It was boom, right there. There you go, starting point right now. And I think a lot of people glommed onto that, you know, the fact that it starts now.
Yeah. And speaking of being on the ground floor, there's something that Image did that I don't think many people were aware of at the time, but you had mentioned how it allowed you to be in control of your own property. If you wanted to start a toy company, you could for whatever reason. Now we're seeing something of a blueprint form from what Image has done with the, you know, mass popularization of media that's derived from comic books. So, you know, The Walking Dead blows up and it blows up into a TV show, and then it's AMC's biggest hit and all of that. And then you find indie publishers who want to find that next big intellectual property in comics that translates well to a mass audience. Is
Lock and
Image,
key.
yeah, lock and key. Yeah, and I think time and time again, Image has shown, you know, they've got the foundation for that. And I know that may not have been something you had the foresight to see back then, you know, in creating your own properties and letting people have their own rights to it. But is there anything you feel like that can happen now that would better position, you know, Image to make that jump, or creators to make that jump in the future?
Yeah, but I think it again, it comes from the story. It comes from the creators. It comes from what they're creating. It doesn't come from the company. Okay, it doesn't come from Image. It doesn't necessarily come from Boom or IDW or anything, or Dark Horse, because all of us have got properties out there that we've published that have become, you know, successful on one level or another. You know,
Yeah.
So it comes from, actually, it just comes from the creators, and that's the thing. My attitude with creators is I'd like to hire people that I trust and that I know do a good job, and then I get the hell out of their way and let them tell their story.
Yeah.
You know, give me a pitch, tell me what you want to do, and then I get out of your way. The only thing that I interfere at all ever on is covers. And the reason is a cover is commerce. And that's it. You know, when you look at it that way, and you must look at it that way, then it's okay to say, you know, this doesn't work as a cover. Give me something else, you know.
Yeah. That's interesting. I've always seen images.
It usually forces someone to actually think a little bit harder and do something better.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I feel like Image has given, the tools to the creators to do with what they want and allow it to succeed. And providing those tools is, property ownership and the ability to do with what you want. Are there any tools that you might have the foresight now to try to implement that would better benefit creators in the future?
No, here's the thing. Image is a gamble. For a creator, it's a gamble. We don't pay a page rate. We don't give you an advance. It is completely and totally a meritocracy. And what that means is this. Your book will succeed or fail on its own merit. It says in our contract, we cannot guarantee success. Okay? It says that in our contract. We cannot guarantee success. Anybody who tells you that they can guarantee you your success, just punch them. Because that's just the best thing in the world to do. We charge the exact same flat fee for a book, regardless of how well or how poorly it sells. So, what does that mean? Well, if you're being taxed 25 cents on a dollar, right? Well, that's a quarter of your income right there, okay? But if you're being taxed 25 cents on $10,000, we don't penalize for success. And that's why somebody like Robert Kirkman is a very good example.
Yeah.
Wound up making a hell of a lot of money off of Walking Dead. Now the question is, can it happen again? Sure. Yeah. If it does, God bless them. I hope it happens. I hope it happens to a bunch of people. I get no greater thrill than seeing people being successful, and knowing that we played a very, very tiny part in that. But really, they're successful because of them, because of their creativity, because of their ideas, because of what they brought to the table. That's a good thing. And that there are people out there like Ross Ritchie at Boom who are allowing this, like Mike Richardson at Dark Horse who are allowing this. Like, I don't know who's running IDW right now, but they do it. It's like there are tons of people out there who are doing this. And, God bless them. I wish them all the best.
Yeah. So heartwarming just to see the love of storytelling. Like, I love it. Yeah.
I think that's where it all begins. Okay.
Yeah.
I think beautiful art will bring someone to a book. Okay. But a good story will bring them back.
Yeah. Amazing.
And I think that is a perfect sentiment to go ahead and close out on. We were at our hour. Jim, thank you so much for stopping by, dropping some knowledge, dropping some history on us.
Guys.
Yeah.
Had a great time.
Hey, thank you. It's truly been our privilege. This has been episode 93 of the Comic Watchers Show. Go out there, be safe, socially distance, wear your mask, just love one another, man. All that hippie stuff is true.
Be good to each other.
That's right. Be good to each other. Support your local comic shop. Read your funny books, and we will see you next time.